A mock rescue exercise was about to begin, and the staff were preparing for it. There was rushing and running everywhere, and in the middle of all that, an old man walked by who looked about 75 years old. He heard the sound of the helicopter and said, "There's something wrong with it." The staff ignored him. To them, he was just an assistant, an ordinary worker with no major technical job. But no one there knew that he had spent his entire life in this work. His name was Ray Mitchell. He was 68, not 75, but the years showed on his face. He worked at Horizon Aviation Services in North Carolina. They maintained helicopters for corporate clients. Ray had been there for 3 years as a contract maintenance advisor. The younger mechanics saw him as extra help, someone who cleaned tools and did basic checks. They didn't ask about his background. Ray stood near the hangar, listening to the Bell 407 warming up on the pad. The rotor blades were spinning, building speed. He heard it immediately, a faint grinding deep in the transmission, something metal scraping where it shouldn't. He walked quickly toward the lead mechanic, a man named Travis who was 32 and trusted his equipment. "That bearing's failing," Ray said, raising his voice over the noise. "Ground this bird." Travis barely looked up from his tablet. The diagnostics showed green across the board. He shook his head and laughed. "Relax, old man. Everything's fine." Ray Mitchell stood near the hangar door, watching the crew. The noise around him faded for a moment, and his mind drifted back. He was 22 again, wearing army greens, standing on a dusty airfield in Vietnam. The heat was unbearable, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with red clay. He wasn't a mechanic back then. He was a helicopter pilot, a warrant officer flying UH-1. Hueys into places where the ground came alive with gunfire. He remembered one mission clearly. November 1971. His unit had received a distress call from a platoon pinned down near the Cambodian border. They were taking heavy fire and had wounded men who wouldn't survive the night. Ray flew in low, rotors screaming, bullets punching holes through the thin metal skin of his bird. He landed in a clearing barely wide enough for the skids. Soldiers ran toward him, dragging their wounded. One man's leg was torn open, another had stopped breathing. Ray's co-pilot kept yelling at him to leave, that they were taking too much fire. But Ray waited. He counted heads. 12 men loaded. Then he pulled up hard, the Huey shaking and groaning under the weight. They made it out. Barely. For that mission, Ray received the Distinguished Flying Cross. But he never talked about it. After 26 years of service, Ray retired as a chief warrant officer. He'd flown in Vietnam and later trained younger pilots stateside. He knew helicopters inside and out, every sound, every vibration, every warning sign that something was about to go wrong. When he left the Army, he worked as a civilian contractor and later earned his FAA inspector certification. He could have kept that job, made good money, but after his wife died 5 years ago, he didn't want the pressure anymore. He took a quieter position at Horizon Aviation. Less responsibility, less pay. Just enough to stay busy and keep his hands on the machines he loved. But the younger crew didn't see any of that. To them, Ray was just an old man who moved slowly and complained too much. They saw his age, not his experience. They saw someone from a different era, stuck in old ways, unable to keep up with modern technology. This week had been especially hard. He'd flagged a problem with the Bell 407 3 days in a row, a grinding noise in the transmission bearing, subtle but unmistakable. Travis, the lead mechanic, had brushed him off each time. Travis was 32, credentialed, and confident in his diagnostic tools. When Ray brought it up again this morning, Travis didn't even look at him. He just tapped his tablet and said, "All green, Ray. Stop worrying." Ray tried to explain, "The sensors don't catch everything. You have to listen." "I don't need a lecture from the old days," Travis interrupted. "We've got systems now. One of the other mechanics laughed. Ray felt his face flush, but he said nothing. He wasn't going to argue. He'd learned long ago that some people only listen after it's too late. So Ray went over Travis's head. He walked into the ops manager's office, a man named Callahan who handled schedules and client accounts. Callahan barely looked up from his computer when Ray came in. "We need to ground the 407, Ray said. Callahan frowned. "Why?" "Transmission bearing's failing. I've been hearing it for 3 days. Travis says it's fine." "Travis is wrong." Callahan sighed and leaned back in his chair. The company was struggling. They'd lost 2 major contracts this year, and this executive shuttle service was one of the few reliable clients they had left. A high-profile CEO and 2 executives were scheduled to fly tomorrow morning. If they canceled now, they'd lose the account. Maybe for good. "Ray, I can't ground a helicopter based on a hunch," Callahan said. "We can't afford the downtime." "You can't afford a crash either." "The diagnostics are clean. Travis checked them twice. I trust his judgment." Ray stood there, silent. He knew what was happening. It wasn't about safety. It was about money, about keeping the client happy, about not rocking the boat. "I'm putting it in writing," Ray said quietly. Callahan waved a hand. "Do what you need to do." Ray walked out. He went to his locker, pulled out a notebook, and wrote everything down. The date, the time, the exact sound he'd heard, the location of the bearing. His recommendation to ground the aircraft immediately. He signed it, dated it, and handed it to the front desk. A young mechanic named Carla saw him do it. She didn't say anything, but she watched him carefully. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the flight, the CEO, the executives, the pilot. All of them trusting that the machine would hold together. Ray had spent his whole life making sure machines didn't fail, and now, for the first time in years, he felt powerless. Ray arrived at the hangar before sunrise. The air was cold and still. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours. He parked his truck in the far corner of the lot and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He'd already written his concerns down yesterday, but this morning he added more detail. Times, observations, technical notes about bearing wear patterns he'd seen in combat birds decades ago. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. When he walked into the hangar, the crew was already there. Travis was running through the pre-flight checklist with 2 junior mechanics. The client's advance team had arrived early, too. 3 people in business suits standing near the office, checking their watches. The CEO and his executives would be here in 20 minutes. Ray walked straight toward Travis. "I need 1 more minute with you," Ray said. Travis didn't look up from his clipboard. "We've been over this, Ray. Just listen." "No, you listen." Travis stopped what he was doing and turned to face him. His voice was loud enough that everyone in the hangar could hear. "We've checked this bird 3 times. The diagnostics are clean. You keep bringing this up, and honestly, I'm starting to think you've got a problem with me." Ray felt the eyes of the crew on him. The client's advance team had stopped talking and were now watching. "This isn't personal," Ray said quietly. That bearing is fine." Travis cut him off. "You know what your problem is? You're stuck in the 70s. You don't trust modern systems because you don't understand them, and now you're trying to sabotage this contract because you want to prove you're still relevant." The words hit harder than Ray expected. One of the junior mechanics looked down at his boots. Carla, standing near the tool rack, crossed her arms and frowned. The client liaison, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s, stepped forward. "Is there an actual problem with the aircraft?" she asked. Travis shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just an overly cautious employee who doesn't understand how modern diagnostics work." She looked at Ray. "Are you a certified mechanic?" Ray hesitated. I'm a maintenance advisor, but I have 26 years of... So, no certification for this specific aircraft. Not current, but then I think we're fine. She turned back to Travis. How soon can we get in the air? 10 minutes, Travis said. The liaison nodded and walked back to her team. Travis looked at Ray and lowered his voice, though it was still loud enough for others to hear. You need to step back. If you keep interfering, I'll have Callahan remove you from the premises. Ray didn't move. He wanted to say more, to explain what he'd heard, but he knew it wouldn't matter, not now. Not with the client standing right there. He stepped back toward the wall. One of the younger mechanics muttered something to another, and they both laughed. Ray caught the words. Maybe the old man needs a hearing aid for that bad bearing he keeps hearing. More laughter. Carla didn't laugh. She looked at Ray, and for a moment he thought she might say something, but she didn't. Ray pulled out his phone. He opened the camera app and started recording. He filmed the pre-flight checks, the mechanics walking around the helicopter, Travis signing off on the final inspection. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. If you've ever been ignored for doing the right thing, you know how Ray felt in that moment. Standing on the sidelines, watching people dismiss what you know to be true, hoping you're wrong, but knowing you're not. The CEO and his two executives arrived. They shook hands with the liaison, smiled, and climbed into the helicopter. The pilot ran through his checks, the engine started, the rotor blades began to spin. Ray kept recording. The Bell 407 lifted off the pad, smooth and steady, and banked east toward the conference site 30 miles away. Ray stood alone near the hangar door, phone still in his hand, and waited. 3 minutes into the flight, the grinding sound Ray had warned about turned into something violent. The pilot felt it first, a shudder that ran through the entire airframe. Then came the noise, metal tearing against metal, louder than the rotor blades. The CEO in the back seat gripped his armrest. One of the executives shouted something the pilot couldn't hear. The pilot didn't hesitate. He cut the throttle and entered auto-rotation, letting the helicopter fall in a controlled descent, using the air rushing up through the rotors to keep them spinning. He spotted an empty industrial lot below. Gravel and dirt, no people, no cars. He brought the bird down hard but level. The skids hit the ground with a jolt that rattled everyone's teeth. Then the engine seized completely. Smoke poured from the transmission housing. A small fire started, orange flames licking at the metal. The pilot hit the fire suppression system and yelled for everyone to get out. They scrambled from the cabin, the CEO stumbling, his executives helping him away from the aircraft. The pilot grabbed the extinguisher and sprayed foam until the flames died. No one was hurt. But it had been close. Back at the hangar, the radio crackled. The pilot's voice came through, shaken but steady. Engine failure, emergency landing. Everyone's safe. We need recovery. Travis stood frozen near the radio. His face had gone pale. The client liaison was already on her phone, her voice sharp and fast. Callahan, the ops manager, rushed in from his office. What happened? Travis swallowed hard. Transmission failure. I don't know how. It was a freak failure. The diagnostics were clean. Carla, the junior mechanic, had been standing near the door. She'd watched Ray that morning, watched him film the pre-flight, watched him try one last time to stop this from happening. Now she walked over to Callahan and said, "It wasn't a freak failure." Callahan turned to her. "What?" She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket, Ray's written warning from yesterday. She'd pulled it from the file after Ray left the hangar. Ray flagged this 3 days ago. He documented it. He told Travis. He told you. Callahan took the paper and read it. His jaw tightened. Carla held up her phone. "And I recorded Ray this morning. He tried to stop the flight. Travis shut him down in front of everyone." She played the video. Travis's voice came through clearly. "You're stuck in the 70s. You don't trust modern systems because you don't understand them." Callahan's face changed. The client liaison stepped closer, listening. She wasn't smiling anymore. Callahan looked at Travis, then at the paper in his hand, then at the radio still crackling with updates from the crash site. He walked into his office and made a call. When he came back out, his voice was different. Calm. Controlled. "FAA's been notified. They're sending an inspector, and I called in a favor. Army Aviation Safety Center is sending someone too." Travis looked confused. "Why the Army?" Callahan didn't answer. He just looked toward the door, where Ray's truck was still parked in the corner of the lot. This wasn't about ego anymore. It was about accountability, and about who really knew their craft. An hour later, 2 vehicles pulled into the lot. The first was a plain sedan with government plates. The second was a dark SUV with Army markings. 2 men stepped out. The first was an FAA safety inspector, middle-aged, carrying a briefcase and a clipboard. The second was older, maybe 60, with silver hair cut military short and a chest full of ribbons on his service uniform. He wore the rank of colonel. The hangar went quiet. Travis stood near the office door, still pale. Callahan waited by the entrance, arms crossed. The client liaison had stayed, her lawyers now on speakerphone. Carla stood off to the side, watching. Ray was near his truck, leaning against the hood, when the colonel walked toward him. The man's face broke into a slight smile. He extended his hand. "Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell," he said. Ray straightened. He hadn't heard that rank in years. He shook the man's hand. "Colonel Vega." The room went completely silent. Everyone turned to look. Travis's mouth opened slightly. Callahan's arms dropped to his sides. Vega kept his tone professional, but there was warmth in it. "It's been a long time, Ray. I heard you were here. When Callahan called in about the incident and mentioned your name, I cleared my schedule." He turned to face the others. "For those who don't know, Chief Warrant Officer Ray Mitchell served 26 years in Army aviation. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a flight engineer and a maintenance test pilot. He flew UH-1 Hueys in Vietnam and later trained on Chinooks and Apaches. 3 combat tours." Vega paused, his eyes moving across the crew. In 1971, CW-2 Mitchell flew into a hot landing zone under heavy fire to extract a surrounded platoon. His aircraft took multiple hits. The hydraulics failed mid-flight. He kept that bird in the air long enough to get 12 wounded soldiers out. For that action, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Travis looked at Ray like he was seeing him for the first time. After his service, Ray worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. He became an FAA-certified airframe inspector, one of the best in the business. About 5 years ago, he stepped back into advisory roles. Quieter work, less pressure. Vega looked at Ray. "But the skills don't fade, do they?" Ray shook his head. "No, sir, they don't." Vega turned to Callahan. "May I see the documentation?" Callahan handed him Ray's written warnings and Carla's phone with the time-stamped video. Vega read through the notes carefully, then watched the video. His face remained neutral, but his jaw tightened when he heard Travis's words. He walked over to the wreckage photos the FAA inspector had already pulled up on a laptop. The transmission housing was cracked open. The bearing completely destroyed. Vega pointed at the screen. "This matches Chief Mitchell's diagnosis exactly. Bearing wear, metal fatigue, vibration signature. He called it 3 days ago." He closed the laptop and turned to face Callahan and Travis. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "This man saved lives today. If that helicopter had been at altitude over populated areas, or if the pilot had been less experienced, you'd be dealing with fatalities right now. You're lucky Chief Mitchell stayed. You're lucky he documented everything. And you're lucky he's the kind of man who does the right thing even when no one listens. Travis looked at the floor. The client liaison, still on the phone with her lawyers, was taking notes. Vega handed the paperwork back to Callahan. The FAA will handle the official investigation, but from where I'm standing, you've got a man on your crew who saw this coming and did everything in his power to stop it. If I were you, I'd be asking him what else you've been missing. The vindication was quiet. No speeches, no drama, just the facts laid out cold and clear. Ray stood by his truck, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. He didn't need to. After Colonel Vega and the FAA inspector left, Callahan walked over to Ray. The hangar had emptied out. Most of the crew had gone home. It was just the two of them standing near the toolboxes. Callahan looked tired. He took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair. "I owe you an apology," he said. Ray nodded but didn't say anything. "I should have listened. I was worried about the contract, about keeping the client happy, and I ignored what you were telling me. That was wrong." Callahan paused. "I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Ray said quietly. Callahan called a meeting the next morning. The entire crew gathered in the break room. Travis stood near the back, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. Callahan didn't waste time. "Yesterday, we almost killed 3 people," he began. "Not because of a freak accident, not because of bad luck, but because we ignored someone who knew better than us." He looked around the room. Ray Mitchell flagged a problem 3 days in a row. He documented it. He escalated it. And we dismissed him. Why? Because he's older? Because he doesn't use a tablet? Because we thought our computers knew more than his experience? No one answered. Dismissing expertise based on age or assumption isn't just disrespectful. It's dangerous. It almost cost lives. And it could have cost this company everything. After the meeting, Travis walked over to Ray. His face was pale, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Ray, He stopped, searching for words. "I'm sorry. I was arrogant. I thought I knew better because I had the latest tools, the certifications, the training, but I missed it. You didn't." Ray looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "I appreciate that." Travis hesitated. "Could you show me? What you heard? What I missed? I don't want to make that mistake again." Ray's expression softened. "Yeah, I can do that." They walked over to one of the other helicopters in the bay. Ray showed him how to listen, not just to the diagnostics, but to the machine itself. Where to place your hand to feel vibrations. What a healthy bearing sounds like versus one that's failing. Travis took notes. He asked questions. He listened. Later that week, the company announced a new safety protocol. Any technician's written concern, regardless of rank or seniority, would trigger a mandatory third-party review before the aircraft could fly, no exceptions. The client liaison came by a few days after the incident. She found Ray in the hangar, checking a fuel line. She didn't say much, just, "Thank you, you saved lives." Ray nodded. "Just doing my job." The FAA inspector called Callahan and told him that Ray's documentation would likely protect the company from the worst of the liability. It showed they had an employee who identified the problem and tried to stop the flight. That mattered. The lesson was clear. Humility, experience, and process save lives. Arrogance and shortcuts cost them. Speed doesn't matter if you don't make it to the destination. And spectacle means nothing compared to the quiet stewardship of people who know their craft and do the right thing, even when no one is watching. A week later, Ray was back in the hangar. 2 junior techs stood beside him, including Carla. They were gathered around a turbine engine mounted on a test stand. Ray held an old field manual in one hand and a stethoscope in the other. "Listen here," he said. placing the stethoscope against the housing, healthy bearing sounds smooth like a hum. A failing one, you'll hear a tick, then a grind. Subtle at first. Carla leaned in, listening carefully. The other tech took notes. Ray's hands moved across the engine, scarred from decades of work but steady. He pointed out the places where metal meets metal, where heat builds up, where failure starts long before the computer catches it. He didn't lecture. He just taught. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It's in the details, the discipline, the willingness to be the only voice in the room when everyone else looks away. It's in knowing that doing the right thing isn't always popular, but it's always necessary. On Ray's workbench sat two things side by side. His faded Army aviation lapel pin, worn smooth by the years, and beside it, a new company safety commendation with his name engraved on it. If this story reminds you why we honor those who serve quietly and live their values every day, share it. Drop a comment honoring a veteran you know. Subscribe to keep these stories alive. Because the best heroes aren't the ones who seek attention. They're the ones who do what's right, even when no one is watching.